What are we doing today? What are we doing today? We are going to be discussing some best practices for when you're cutting and chopping food in the kitchen, especially when you're handling knives. Okay, so that's kind of an open-ended question: is how do you handle a knife safely when your vision's impaired or when you're blind? And some of this may be a little bit of a retread from a few weeks ago. We kind of touched on this briefly. I did in a previous discussion. But what I'm going to do today is show you some tips, some suggestions while I'm actually demonstrating it. And I hope that these things will be helpful to some of you out there. You can put some of these tools in your toolbox so that at home, if you are going to make a recipe, most of the time those call for some kind of ingredients, and oftentimes ingredients that need to be cut up, like vegetables, for example, or fruit. So, I will say from the outset, a lot of people out there, when they lose their sight, kind of grapple with some of the fears associated with blindness or with sight loss, and especially when it comes to the kitchen. When you're in the kitchen, you think about all the things that could possibly go wrong, right? Here you are, a blind person, and you're in the kitchen, and you've got what? You've got an oven, you've got hot surfaces, you've got a stovetop, right? Those questions of, well, what if I burn myself? What if I injure myself? Or in this case, what if I cut myself? Now, one thing to keep in mind is that no matter if somebody can see or if they can't, there's always going to be a certain level of risk involved when you go in the kitchen. Okay, when you do things in a kitchen space, there's always going to be a certain level of risk, and that's true of when you could see. A lot of folks who are sighted do make mistakes. They may slip and cut themselves, or they may burn themselves. All that to say that don't think that, well, if I go in the kitchen, then maybe I'm putting myself at risk. That's a given, even if you can see. Okay, so just keep that in mind, because sometimes we have a tendency as folks who are blind or visually impaired to kind of talk ourselves out of doing things. If you think about, oh man, what if I cut myself, or what if I nick myself, or what if I catch something on fire? You always imagine the worst case scenario. Okay, but today we're going to talk about cutting. Now, let me describe to you what I have, because some of this is not visible, but let me describe it and I'll show it as best I can. Okay, now in front of myself here, and I believe, Rebecca, you can tell me the camera is focused on my cutting board, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So I have a cutting board. Okay. Now this cutting board is it's color contrasted. Right now, the board is white, and then if I were to flip it over, you would notice that the other side is dark. Okay, it's black. So there's a contrast. Now, why is contrast so important? Okay. The reason why contrast is important is a lot of folks out there, some of you listening, I'm sure, you may have some low vision that you rely upon or that you use. And probably that contrast can make all the world a difference, okay? In case in point with this cutting board, if I were to put on here an onion, okay, an onion is white, the board is white, so that really wouldn't pop. However, if I were to take the board and I were to flip it over, put the onion on top of this board, then that white onion would pop on that darker background. Okay, I'm gonna flip it over here again and have the white side facing up. So let me show you just real quickly. I have an apple here. Now you notice that that apple is it's popping, right? The white background allows the apple to be seen, to be visible, right? So we can use contrast strategically when we're in the kitchen and when we're trying to identify items or keep them visible through contrast. Okay, so that's what we have there. We have a cutting board. Now, over here to the right of the cutting board, I've got a knife. So I believe this is visible, correct, Miss Rebecca?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so this is a lettuce knife. Now, you've seen this in my repertoire before. I'm going to be using this knife, but also other knives as well. Now, in a previous discussion we had, I talked about when you're handling a knife, how do you know which side is sharp and which side is not? Now, as folks who are visually impaired or blind, it's very much par for the course for us to want to, touch things to gain that information, to have certainty. But with a knife, you don't want to reach in and and start feeling along the sides of the edge of the knife itself, out of risk of cutting yourself. But in this case, it's okay because this is a plastic lettuce knife, so I can take my finger and I can go along the serrated edge and I can go along the top edge. But we're just going to pretend that this knife here is, in fact, a metal knife, okay, a very sharp knife. All right. How would I know which side is sharp and which side isn't without touching it? And so the clue is in the handle, okay? All right, the clue is in the handle. So on the handle here, if you notice on the very top, one side is smooth and the other side has a notch, or it's not smooth, it has a groove, in other words. So the same side that has the groove is on the same side as the serrated edge or the sharp side of the knife. Okay, so if that groove is facing down, then I know the blade is facing down. Okay, all right. So I'm going to put that aside for a moment, and I'm going to show you something else here in my repertoire. Now, I have an actual knife here. Okay, this is what shaman call a grown-up knife. But this is a steak knife, okay? And I want to illustrate something to you that, again, with the handle, just like with the prior knife, the one side is flat and the other side is a groove. That groove is on the same side as the blade, okay? Just want to show that translates to other knives as well. In fact, I have another knife here I'm going to show you, okay? This is the third knife, all right? So this knife here is quite sharp, and I'm going to contact the handle here. This side of the handle is flat, so I know that that's the dull side of the handle. And I know that on the other side, the underside, is a groove, okay? So actually this has two grooves. There's a groove over here at the very end of the handle, and then there's actually a groove here at the midpoint of the handle, and this is on the same side as the blade, okay? So I know if that groove is facing down, then the blade is facing down, okay? That's the way to get a handle on the situation. No pun intended. Maybe pun intended, I don't know. All right, so now, the other thing to keep in mind when we're dealing with knives is we want to make sure that when you're not using the knife in your workspace, that you want to make sure that when your knife is not on the cutting board, you don't have it in your hand. What I generally do is I put the knife underneath the cutting board itself. Now, I don't know if this is visible. Rebecca, is this visible?
Move the knife. No, come it, like bring it back towards you, son.
Okay, I can do that. How about now?
Keep going. Now we can see it.
Okay, so what I'm doing, for those of you who cannot see when I'm moving about here, is I have my cutting boards in front of me. I have underneath the cutting board a tile mat, and then I have my knife underneath the cutting board towards the top right corner. And, and what I've done is I have put the blade of the knife underneath the cutting board so that only the handle is is unobscured or can be contacted. Because you think about it, okay? If you're visually impaired, and it's so easy to do this because I've done it, yet you kind of get in a hurry, right? You got all these moving parts in the kitchen. You've got your ingredients, and you've got your cooking ware and your utensils, and you're putting ingredients together, and you're juggling, and you have a lot of moving parts. So you get kind of sidetracked, and you take the blade, you put it down, and you walk away. And then what happens? You come back later on, and you start kind of scrambling. Well, where did I put that knife at? I can't find that knife. Oh my gosh. Well, what you don't want to do is end up contacting the knife with your hand and maybe injuring yourself unnecessarily. So a good rule of thumb, a best practice, if you will, is to take the knife, the blade, and put it underneath the cutting board when you're not using it, okay? I'm gonna put this over here back to where I had it originally. Rebecca, am I good? Any questions so far?
You are good. Will you remind them how to raise their hand?
I will, thank you. Excellent point. So to raise your hand, if you're on a phone, you hit *9, or likewise, if you're on a computer, you do Alt-Y to raise your hand. So *9 on a phone, Alt-Y on a computer, okay? All right, so if nothing else, I'm gonna continue on here. I'm gonna show you what else I have in my repertoire. Here are other items I have. Now, Rebecca, I'm putting here a cookie sheet in front of the camera. Is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. So good rule of thumb, a good best practice is when you're visually impaired and you're in the kitchen. What I try to do is before I start cooking, I assemble everything that I need. And how I do that is I use a cookie sheet with a kind of a deep dish cookie sheet. Okay. And so that way I can take all of my items, okay? All of my items, I can put them in the cookie sheet, they're enclosed. Now, what would be the advantage of doing something like that? So for me, the advantage is that if I had all these items and I didn't have them in the cookie sheet and I had them kind of strewn about on my counter space, you know, what's going to happen is I'm going to reach for something and I'm going to start knocking things over. I'm going to start bumbling and fumbling, okay? And what I find is if you take these items and you put them in the cookie sheet, it keeps them all in one space together, and it's good for easy retrieval, and also it helps you to keep things organized, okay? Now, what items do I have in my cookie sheet here, okay? So let me go through these briefly. I've got an apple. I've got 2 apples, in fact. All right. I've got a zucchini. And I have a carrot stick. All right. And I have a few other items that I'll get to here shortly, okay? I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it aside. It's out of the way. All right. So let's talk about cutting. Okay, now I'm going to take an apple here. All right, look at an apple. Is that visible, Miss Rebecca? Should be good,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the apple here, I'm going to cut this. But before I start cutting away, I'm going to share with you guys a technique that I use pretty often when I'm cutting things, and it translates to a lot of different items. I call it the bridge technique. Some people call it something differently, perhaps, but I call it the bridge technique. And so what I do is I take my index finger and my thumb and I place it on either side of the item I'm about to cut. So what advantage would that afford me, given that I'm blind? The advantages are a couple. For one, it allows me to stabilize the item I'm about to cut, in this case an apple, because I have my index and my thumb on either side. But secondly, it also allows me to judge the width of my cut, okay? So I can make my fingers more narrow, or I can make them wider, so that I can determine the width of my cut. And also, by the way, when I'm performing this gesture with my hands, I am curling my other fingers up, curling my other fingers in, rather, okay? So only my index finger and my thumb on either side of the item, okay? All right. Any questions so far? All right, so it's Alt-Y to raise your hand on a computer, and it's *9 on a phone. I'm gonna grab my knife here, okay? I've got my knife, my lettuce knife, and I'm going to perform that bridge technique that I discussed, okay? I'm gonna put it on either side of this apple here. Now, I've got a crosshair or a needle through which I can bring this knife. In fact, I think I'm gonna do it. I'm a left-handed person. I'm a lefty. I'm a southpaw, so I'm sure a lot of you guys out there are righties. I don't meet a lot of left-handed people out there. If you're left-handed out there, please let me know before this is over with. I don't meet many lefties. All right, so I've got my bridge technique on top of the apple. I got my knife going through the in between my two fingers, and I know that the knife blade's facing down again because the groove of the handle is facing down. And with this knife, it's not so much a cutting as it is more of a sawing, because it has that serrated edge, okay? But here we go, and I'm going to start sawing here. And one thing to keep in mind too is, you know, when the way that I know to stop sawing is I'm going to eventually hear the sound of the lettuce knife contacting the cutting board, okay? All right, it'll be my cue to stop because I can't cut through the cutting board. All right, here we go. All right, I think I did it that time. Let's see what we got there. Aha. So what we have here is, I'll put this knife away. We have two equal halves of an apple, okay? And I achieved that for the most part by using that bridge technique, okay? All right. Now, the nice thing about having two equal halves of an apple is now we have a flat surface to deal with, okay, on both of these items. And that makes things even easier going forward. Because if I want to cut these into smaller halves, I can take them and I can lay them flat. And that is going to afford me more stability as I'm cutting, okay? Because before it was kind of a little bit more of an awkwardly shaped item there. But now that I can lay them flat, I can perform that technique even more easily, okay? I'm going to do that one more time. Use the bridge technique on this one. All right.
Kevin,
Yes.
while you're cutting, Liz has a question. Can I let her ask while you're cutting?
1 second. Yes. Hold on 1 second. Let me cut this 1 1/2 here, okay? All right. So again, I use the bridge technique, and now I have two equal halves of the other half, okay? All right. So yes, Liz.
Okay, question is, how do you know you're going down from the top of the apple to the bottom of the apple in a straight line?
That's an excellent question, okay?
Okay.
Excellent question. So I'm going to grab the other apple here. Since I already cut these in half. Now, with an apple, that's a really good question, Liz. Thank you. With this apple here, with my two fingers on top, I can kind of bring them in to the center of where the stem would be. And then from that point, I can open up my fingers to widen the eye of that needle. But again, we're talking about something that's very tactile by nature, but that's how you would do it, is you would use your fingers on top to find the eye or the stem of the apple rather, and then expand, open up from there. And then that would guarantee that you are more or less within the center of the item, okay? And keep in mind, this doesn't have to be a hard and, a rule per se. There is some give and take. It doesn't have to be perfect. So after all, you are going to eat it eventually. But all right, so I have these two halves, okay, of the first half of the apple. I'm going to put them aside for the moment. In fact, what I'm going to do is I've got some bowls here. I've got a bowl here. I'm going to put these two halves in this bowl, okay? I'm going to put that aside, put that in my on my cookie sheet. I'm going to go to the next item. And if it helps you, Liz, and others out there, if you want to be assured that you're in the center of the item, you can start with both fingers on either side of the apple as it's laying flat. So it's on either end, and then bring your fingers, your thumb and your index finger right above it, and beat them in the middle. Pinch them together, and then widen that eye of that needle. And then as you have that crosshair, you bring your knife in between. And again, we want to make sure that we have our blade facing down, and that as we're cutting, we're doing a downward sawing motion, okay? Here we go. Oh, there we go. All right. So I cut those two in half, and that one wasn't particularly perfect, but it all tastes the same at the end of the day, okay? I'm gonna do one more cut with this. So I've got a larger half of that half. I'm gonna bring my two fingers on top, index and thumb, my bridge technique, bring the knife in between my two fingers, and I'm gonna cut right through. And now I have, voila, two equal halves. And I'm doing all of this without any vision, folks. So it's all tactile. It's all just by feel, okay? All right, so I'm gonna put this aside for the moment.
Kevin,
Yes.
Liz has another question.
All right, Liz.
Okay. I sometimes tend to tilt my knife, even if I'm doing the bridge like you were showing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're on a taller item like the whole apple, and your knife is just askew a little bit, it's gonna, by the time you get to the bottom, it's gonna be way off center.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And your concern would be if the knife, if it edges too far, if it tilts too far to the left, it could cut through and where you don't want it at, right?
Right, because like some things you have to dice into like size pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, Liz,
that doesn't happen much.
I have just the item here that might help you, okay? Because I have I brought a few things, and what I have here is, you ever heard of an apple cutter before?
Yes.
So I have an apple cutter that I can use to cut this into equally segmented portions, and so that can help ensure that you that you are cutting it correctly. But also, it's that kind of principle of working smarter, not harder. But also, I'm sensitive to that. Some people out there listening may have some arthritic challenges, may have some dexterity challenges, right? And this item might be of help. Or it could be challenging in other ways, because it does require that you put down a certain amount of force, a certain amount of effort. Okay, but I'm going to attempt to cut this apple with this apple cutter. Okay, so what I'm doing is there's a hole in the center of the apple cutter. And for those of you who don't know, I'm sorry if I don't want to make too many assumptions here. Now, what I'm holding here is, it's called an apple cutter, and it's basically it's rounded, and it has crisscrossing blades, more or less, and it has handles on either side, and there's a hole in the center. So I can take the hole, I can line it up with the stem of the apple, and then there are blades around that, and then as I exert pressure, it's going to dice them into multiple slices all at one time. Okay, so here we go. All right. Aha. All right, so now we've got a nice core here in the center. Pull that out, or I can pull the items, the slices out from around the epicenter of the cutter. So yeah, I've got multiple slices. I would eat one right now, but it'd be really loud on the microphone. But apples are good for you, though. Good source of antioxidant. We all need antioxidants. I know I do. I've been challenged to eat healthier since I've been in this current quarantine situation. Okay. All right. So I'm going to put that over here in my bowl, and I'm going to take my apple cutter. I'm going to put it back on my cookie sheet. Okay. So you may hear the contact there. Yes.
Alice has a question.
Hi, Alice.
Hey, I have a question. Of course, I still have a little vision, although I lost some more this week.
Yes.
I see the seeds flying everywhere. When do you address seeds? With oranges or apples or lemons, whatever?
Well, what I would normally do, and granted, I'm not set up at the moment to do this, but generally, I would take the cutting board after each time that I've cut an apple, for example, and I would put it in my sink and I would wash it off into the sink. In fact, typically, I have my cutting board right next to my sink, so that as
a lot of the seeds are still in your apple. If you
still in your apple
like that, you would eat the seed, and that would be the same with the orange.
Right. Yeah. I guess it would be up to personal preference. I mean, I've never been one that's been bothered by that. I don't.
There are a lot of people to start
I'm sorry.
swallowing. It would injure a lot of people to start swallowing.
Sure.
So
Well,
I was curious.
Sure.
I mean, things like that is what concerns me.
There are seedless apples out there, and also there are apples that are already sliced. There is some give and take there.
I didn't know if you could feel the seeds.
Can I feel the seeds? Well, let's see, Miss Alice. I've got an apple sliced right here, and I don't know that I can feel a seed. I don't know that they're quite small. These may actually be seedless apples. Those of you who can see.
Seeds.
What's that?
You've got a lot of seeds in some of those apple pieces.
Yeah, I think I feel one actually right there. Yeah, I do. Yeah. And what you also could do, Alice, is after you've sliced these, take each piece and put it under the water in the sink and wash them off really well. Okay. Rinse them off. Just kind of overcorrect. Because I do when I cook or clean, if I'm not able to see, I do a lot of overcorrection. Even though I can't see it, I still know it's there. And so if I do a lot of rinse, lather, and repeating, eventually I'm going to overcorrect to the point where I'm going to pick up that stray seed, or whatever it happens to be. Right.
Right. Okay. that answered my question. Thank you.
Alice, do you like this cutting board? Do you think if you use a
I
cutting board
do,
like
and I was going to ask you later where you got that.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do is Miss Rebecca, when she sends out the wrap out, the wrap up email,
Mhm.
we're gonna include links to where you can find one such as this. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to get one of those. Yes, definitely.
Also, what's helpful too, and although I don't have one at the moment, is it's called a Dyson pad, and it's basically a rubber pad that you can put underneath the cutting board on a flat surface, and that would prevent the cutting board from shimmying, from
That's
moving
a
back
good
and forth,
idea.
keeping it stable.
You're cutting where I have to cut on my stove.
Yeah. Okay, good question, Alice. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to a couple of other items here I have. I'm going to introduce a different technique. Okay. Now, any other questions before I go a little further here? Okay. All right. Pardon me. So what I have here is I have a carrot stick. Okay. Carrot sticks are they're orange in color, although I'm not able to see that very well, but I'm assuming that's still orange, right, Rebecca?
Just a little closer to you. You just went out of focus. A little
How about,
closer. There you go. And
all
it is.
right. So I'm going to flip this cutting board over, and we're going to use the other side here, and and you guys tell me out there, is that better compared to the white contrast, or is it less visible this way? Less visible, the darker background, or more visible with a wider background? Because I would think it would be more visible on a.
Alice just raised her hand.
Yes, Alice, go ahead.
Yeah, it's more visible on the white.
On the
because
white.
It's a bright orange.
Bright orange. Okay.
Yeah. The thing is that onion and things like that would not be able to be seen on the white, but the bright orange shows up on the white.
Yeah. And again, it's case by case. If you find that to be true, you can, if you have a cutting board such as this, you can.
You're totally blind. It doesn't matter. The white would probably be better.
Okay. So Miss Allie is saying that she could see it better with a darker background. Okay. But the thing about vision is it's individual to each person, right? But I'm going to go, and I'm going to go with the lighter background so Miss Alice can see it. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to find my knife. Now, before I do that, let's just do a little pop quiz here. What do we do with the knife when we're not using it in our workspace? Do we need the Jeopardy theme, Rebecca?
I know the answer. Can I answer?
No, because you're not in the class. Anyone? All right. Count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. What's the answer, Rebecca?
It goes under the cutting board.
Under the cutting board. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to put it under the cutting board here. I got my knife and I got my carrot stick. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, I'm going to put that back here for a moment because I am getting a little far ahead of myself. I'm going to put that underneath the cutting board. Now, we have a carrot stick here, and honestly, for a long item such as this, the bridge technique's not going to be as appropriate, okay? Because it's a long item and you want to cut it into smaller halves, into slices, in other words, right?
Kevin, can you pull it closer to you just a little? There you go.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So, yes. So a longer item such as this, we're going to use a different technique, different than the bridge, okay? I have a couple ways we can do it. We can do, what I do is this is not kind of a little shorter carrot stick, the one I usually use, but that's fine. So you can do is, depending on where you start, you may start over here on the left side. You may start over here on the right side. I'm a lefty, and what I'm probably going to do is hold the knife in my left hand, and I'm going to start from the right side and work my way left, okay? Now, what you can do is, with your hand that's not holding the knife, in this case, my right hand, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to kind of make my hand into a fist, okay? I'm going to curl my fingers in, okay? All right, even my thumb's kind of tucked into my hand, into my fist, okay? And I'm going to start over here on one side and on the right side. And what's going to happen is I'm going to bring my knife so that the blade is parallel to my hand, okay? And then with my hand, with my fist pushing down on the carrot, it's going to provide some stability, okay? Some stability. All right. So I'm going to retrieve my knife. Got my knife here. I'm going to bring it over here parallel to my hand. Okay. And I'm going to make a cut. It's a little slippery on my end there. All right. So I got a cut there for my carrot. Okay. Now, that's one way to do that. Now, put that over here for the moment. All right. So one other way you can do that is you can take your hand, your right hand in my case, make it into a fist, but then extend one finger, that being your index finger, along the side, along the carrot here, at the very bottom, very far end of the right. And so with my finger there, and bringing my knife parallel to it, can really help me to judge the width of my cut, okay? And then also, you can apply some pressure down with your finger, keep that carrot stick from rolling around on you, okay? And I'm gonna go ahead and make my cut. All right, so I got another slice there of my carrot. All right. All right, so now I have another few more inches of this carrot stick left. I'm going to cut through some of these. All right, my carrot stick has a mind of its own. It's rolling away from me. Okay, I'll do one more cut. Okay, any questions so far about my description? I hope it's not leaving any kind of doubt or if it's ambiguous. So again, what I'm doing is with the carrot, I'm just taking my hand, my opposite hand, my right hand, bringing it down to the very far end of the stick, and then I'm applying some pressure to keep it stable, and then I'm bringing my knife parallel. Or you can take the same hand, the same fist, as it's on top of the item, and extend one finger, and then bring the knife parallel to that finger, and then apply pressure with the finger to keep it stable, and then make your cut. And that will also help you to judge the width of your cut, okay? Granted, it works a little bit better with a longer carrot stick. And this carrot stick is, I think it's like halfway between a baby carrot and an adult carrot. It's a adolescent carrot, I don't know. All right, any questions so far? Any questions? Questions or comments? Thoughts or observations? Anything that I'm not describing well enough for some of you out there who can't see what I'm doing?
Alice has her hand up, Kevin.
Yes, Alice,
Do this early on, but do you ever peel?
Do I ever peel? Do I ever peel, Alice? Of course I do.
Okay.
What
I mean, like peel,
example?
yeah, peel the carrot to clean the top of it, or peel skin off of.
So, you know, each person has a different preference for some of this. You know, some people like their apples peeled. They don't like the skins on their apple. They don't like maybe their carrots to have the skin as well. You can peel them. I have a peeler that I use, although I say I use it, but I just don't use it that often. It's not because I don't know how or that I'm, concerned to do that. That's just kind of how I am.
Yeah, I find that harder than cutting. That's why I ask.
Okay, good question. One thing I will throw out there, Alice, is sometimes some vegetables, if you boil them, it makes the skins come off much more easily. So for example, like potatoes, if you take potatoes and you boil them in hot water for about, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, the skin will just peel off. It'll come off very easily. And for some of you guys out there, like Miss Alice, you may have some dexterity challenges. You might find that helps the skin to come off a little bit more easily, right?
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, it'll soften it up and make it easier to handle, right? But also, keep in mind too that there is some give and take with some of these things we're discussing. I know people who are fully sighted who don't buy anything if it's not cut up already. So there's that. You can get potatoes that are already cut up, and apple slices and orange slices, although I don't know as much about maybe the oranges, I'm not sure, but I know that apple slices and many other vegetables, you can get the vegetables already cut up in a mixed pack as well. So you can get carrots cut up, and so that's something to keep in mind too, to kind of cut that corner. Because if you got challenges related to dexterity, or maybe you know how to do it. Maybe you know how. Maybe you just don't. You just want to cut the corner and get things done more quickly. If you have like a crock pot recipe, what I do oftentimes is I will buy the vegetables already cut up. I'll just get a pack of them at the store, because it's just easier to do that, to throw all of it in there than be spending time from scratch cutting things up. So there's no shame in doing that. People do it all the time. All right. Any other questions? So the last thing that I'm going to discuss with you guys, the last item I'm going to cut up here is a piece of zucchini. Yes.
Sorry, another hand just came up. Brenda.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I wanted to ask, how can when you cut in, I think for example, an apple, how you can balance without moving the knife, or without moving the apple, I don't know.
No, that's a great question. And I think this is one of those particular areas that I can demonstrate it to you via this platform, but it also works especially well one-on-one. But what I would encourage some of you to do out there is today, after today's class, go into your kitchen and find something. Find an onion or an apple or something, like a piece of fruit or vegetable, especially something rounded. And practice just creating that bridge on top of it. Okay. You understand what I mean when I say that, Brenda? Okay. So let me describe that one more time. I'm going to take a piece of fruit over here. All right. Got a piece of fruit. I got an apple here. And so this apple's already been cut into a half. It's kind of longer. But the question is, how do I find the center? Because a lot of folks want their apples to be cut up in relatively equal halves. Is that you, Brenda? Do you find that to be your preference?
Yes.
So the question is, how do I know where the center's at? So what I do as somebody who's blind is I'm doing this right now on camera. Rebecca, am I visible with what I'm doing?
Bring it back towards you just a little more. There you go.
All right. So what I'm doing here, Brenda, it is Brenda. Did I say that correct? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So First of all, I have the apple in front of me. It's lengthwise. It's already been cut up into a slice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm taking my index finger and my thumb, and I'm putting it on either side of the slice. It's on opposite ends of the slice. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You with me so
Yes.
far? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my index finger up on the right and my thumb on the left, and I'm going to bring them up so that they're both directly on top of the slice. Okay?
Yes.
Then I'm going to spread them out, the thumb away from the index finger. And so what that does is it kind of creates, at least in my mind, it creates a bridge,
Mm-hmm.
a bridge over the item, over the apple. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now I've got my thumb over here on the left and my index on the right. And what it's doing is it's allowing me to judge the width of my cut, but also to
Mm-hmm.
find the midpoint. On top of that, because I am putting a little bit of weight down onto it,
Mm-hmm.
it's also providing stability. Okay. Because when you start cutting with a knife, it starts to shake, doesn't it? It starts to kind of
Yes.
wobble, as you're describing. So if you could
Yes. Mm-hmm.
put a little bit of weight there on that to provide stability, bring the knife in between, then finding that midpoint, then that
Mm-hmm.
might help. Again, what I would encourage you to do is not so much focus on cutting at the moment, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
just go in there and find something in your pantry or in your refrigerator, a
Yes.
potato or an apple or an onion, and just practice
Mm-hmm.
that gesture of creating a bridge.
Yes.
Your index and your thumb, and you curl your other fingers inward. So the only two
Mm-hmm.
fingers pointing down are the index and the thumb, right?
Yes.
It's gonna that might help to provide stability and also safety.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Does that
Yes.
answer your question?
Yes. I also have another question.
Okay, sure.
How do you like overcome your fears? Like, I don't know, because I'm really scared.
Really
Because
scared.
I'm also blind too.
Yeah,
And I cut
sure,
an
sure.
apple before and I cut myself. Like,
Oh
so
my
I don't know.
goodness. Oh my
So
goodness.
I'm really scared to cut now. Like,
Right. No, I understand that. You know, and sometimes it just takes one accident to talk
yes.
us
Mm-hmm.
out of doing things, right? It's almost kind of like confirmation bias, where you
Mm-hmm.
know maybe your bias was the first place that, well, if I do that and I'm blind, I'm going to hurt
Mm-hmm.
myself. Oh,
Yes.
well, I hurt myself. So it's, it happened because I'm blind. And so
Yeah.
therefore I won't do that. I'm not going to do that again.
yes.
It's like the kid, like the kid touching the hot oven. He's not going to do that
yes.
again, right? You learn
Yes.
your lesson.
Yes.
But the trade-off of that is, you may retain your safety, but you might lose some independence.
Yeah.
And the purpose of what we're doing here is to equip you so that you can continue
Mm-hmm.
doing these things independently, but also safely.
Yes.
And I can tell you, as one who has had I've had some, some bumps over the years in the kitchen, not that many, but I've had a couple of
Mm-hmm.
them. And to this day, I still remember them.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back now, I remember when I originally like burned myself in the kitchen, for example. I'm like, I'm not ever touching that stovetop ever again. No,
yeah.
no, no. But it's also one of those moments you have to consider too. As I said earlier, that
Mm-hmm.
people who are sighted, who can see 20/20, also
Mm-hmm.
occasionally injure themselves in the kitchen, and they can
Yes.
see. It's just
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's just the mere fact that you're in the kitchen, and sometimes things happen. But
Yeah.
I will tell you this though, that
Mm-hmm.
the techniques that I'm discussing and I'm demonstrating, they don't absolutely guarantee your safety in the kitchen.
Yeah.
However, they certainly help. And you might even find eventually that you are more safe and secure in the kitchen than perhaps somebody in your family or some
Mm-hmm.
other individual that you could have
Yeah.
somebody, in the kitchen. Like I have family members, and they may occasionally burn themselves, and, and they can see just fine. Meanwhile,
yeah.
I'm over there, I'm unscathed, and I have all my fingers, by the way, for those of you who can't see or can see, all my fingers are intact out in front of the camera. All right. So I just wanted to point that out, that I The techniques that I'm using have ensured that my fingers haven't become finger food, right? So, pardon the bad pun. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
You bet. You bet.
Mhm.
And hopefully, when things get back to normal in the world, more normal, hopefully, one-on-one training can also resume, and that could help too. What's Rebecca?
Alice has her hand up again.
Hello, Alice.
I wanted to encourage her to get one of those lettuce
Yes.
knives and
Yes.
practice with that first.
Absolutely.
Until she gets good with it. That would give her more confidence, I think.
You are right on the money, Miss Alice. That's right. That, in fact, when I train with people in the beginning, this is what I use. I use the lettuce knife, because it's a safe space. It's a way to learn these techniques that I'm discussing today, without the fear of injury. There's a margin for error. Also, it's good for me as a trainer because I'm blind and I have to reach in and see what that person's doing. So I don't want them to have a steak knife and, as I'm touching their hand to see what they're doing, and then, something, I might.
And I got rid of a lot of my large, sharp knives because I don't find them safe at all, no matter what I do. Yeah.
Sure. That's an excellent point, though. Yes, Brenda, if training in person, if that could resume, or when it does resume, we could get you a lettuce knife. That's what I've been using today, and then offer you some training to help you be safe. Now, for full disclosure, when I'm in the kitchen, I don't use a lettuce knife. I might use a knife that is very much similar to this knife, the steak knife here, for example. But again, the same techniques apply. If you apply these same techniques using a regular knife, it'll translate just as well. And in fact, you may eventually find yourself forgetting that you have a lettuce knife. 'Cause I have a lettuce knife in my pantry from when I first started training years ago when I received it, and it basically stays in one of my pantry shelves. But of course, today it's appropriate to show that. All right, so I'm going to cut one last item for you fine folks out there. I've got a zucchini. Okay, I got a zucchini here. Rebecca, am I good? Is that visible?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I find that the zucchini works a little bit better than the carrot stick because it's longer, it's heavier, it provides more stability. So I'm gonna start over here. I'm gonna take my fingers and curl all of them in, with the exception of my right index finger. I'm gonna hook that over the side of the zucchini. I'm gonna bring my knife parallel with my finger, and then I'm gonna cut through. You hear the chop. There's one slice. I'm gonna bring this parallel again with my finger. Again, it's cutting next to, downward, but not towards my finger. Another slice. In fact, what I'm going to do here is just to show you guys out there, I'm actually going to use my steak knife here, okay, just for the last couple of cuts here, okay, just to show you that you can use a normal knife with the same technique and not become injured, right? All right, so there we go. I've got several pieces of zucchini, but guess what? Look at these items now. Now they're flat, right? What if I wanted to take these zucchini pieces and I wanted to make them even thinner? I could then take the bridge technique. Rebecca, am I good on the visual? Can you see what I'm doing?
Yes.
So I'm going to take the zucchini. I'm going to lay it flat. Again, that provides stability. I'm going to create that bridge on top with my index and thumb at the center of the zucchini, bring the knife blade in between, and I'm going to make my cut straight through. So now look at that. I've got 2 equal halves of the zucchini, okay? And I can do that with a few other pieces if I wanted to. And you can make this as small as you want it. You can keep taking the same piece, lay it on the flat side, that smaller hole, bring of the half, and cut that one in half as well. Make them as small as you want. All right. And so much of this, guys, is really a matter of muscle memory. It's just a matter of doing a lot of rinse, lather, and repeating. And Alice makes a good point. The lettuce knife really allows you to practice with cutting, but without so much the fear of injury. Because sometimes, you know, when you're afraid, you get anxious, and when you get anxious, you may make a mistake that you might not otherwise make. So, all right, so that covers just a few items related to cutting, some principles. So let's talk about it. Let's just review here, okay? So it's a general question for you guys out there. How do we know which side of the blade of the knife is sharp without contacting the knife itself?
Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Liz.
Okay, Liz?
Hi. Well, before you ask that question, I was going to mention about that lettuce knife.
Mm-hmm.
I can only cut lettuce with it. When I try to cut anything else, it goes wonky all over, and I've cut myself with the lettuce knife.
Oh my goodness.
Which I don't do with a regular knife.
Yeah.
Because the thing goes wonky. And the flat side with the little ridge, that's the
flat side of the handle. Okay.
Yep.
I will say with a lettuce knife, it is going to require some strength because we're dealing with a blade that is not metal, and it's serrated. So it's really more, in some cases, it's more of a sawing motion than it is like a straight down cutting motion, right? A chopping motion. Now with the zucchini is pretty soft, and it's easier to cut through. But with an apple, pardon me, you would have to exert some strength there in some cases. But you know, it's case by case. If you find that one way doesn't work, then maybe another way would work. And I hope that what I'm giving you guys is kind of a variety of things to choose from, a variety of ways of approaching these challenges, because not one way works for any one person in particular. Sometimes there's a number of ways to peel the apple, so to speak. All right.
True. I was going to say one other thing.
Yeah,
you
sure.
were talking about getting something to put underneath your chopping board so it doesn't slide. You can also put a wet paper towel underneath it. Save money.
That's a great, I never thought of that before. That is a fantastic point, Liz.
And after you wash your first vegetable or fruit, you've got a wet paper towel. Because
Right
you have to
on.
dry your fruit. You have to dry your stuff before you're supposed to cut them.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Good idea. So yeah, but the thing about this is so great, guys, is we all get to learn from each other, right? Yes, most definitely. And I'm gonna add that little tool to my repertoire, because Dyson pads are a little bit expensive, for sure. All right. So the other question I had is what do we do with a knife when we're not using it? Does it go on our cutting board? Does it go around our workspace? Anyone? Come on. I bet you Alice knows the answer to the question. All right, time's up. It goes underneath. Yeah, yes.
Yes, it goes under the board.
Goes under the board. Good.
Other way to unmute myself.
All right.
Okay.
So good. Thank you. Another question. is what's a good practice for before you begin cooking? What kitchen item could you use to assemble your ingredients into? I'll give you a hint. The last word is sheet.
Alice has her hand up again.
Okay, Alice.
It's the cookie sheet.
Cookie sheet. That's right. Cookie sheet.
Now, are you going to, I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to do a class on like cutting tough things like meat or do you ever do that?
Yeah, I do that. Yeah. That's a great suggestion. I certainly will keep
Chicken,
that.
which would be very difficult. How do
Chicken
you?
would be difficult. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
I know you couldn't have all those meats because we can't hardly buy them, but
Right. Well,
you might have suggestions.
sure, that's a great suggestion. And what I would say to that is that these techniques that we're discussing, the bridge technique in particular, it's going to translate to a lot of different items in your workspace, in your kitchen space, be it chicken or otherwise. But it's a little bit more advanced, granted. So my encouragement is start small and then go big. So starting small might be something like cutting a zucchini into different pieces, right? Or an apple. Learn those techniques. And then from there, you can gain confidence. Because really, what we're talking about at the end of the day, really, when you get down to brass tacks, is confidence, right?
Yeah.
Because when you lose your vision, what I often liken it to a bank account, but instead of money, it's confidence. And when you go blind, when you're visually impaired, your confidence is in the red. You have a deficit because you think, well, I'm blind now, and therefore I can't do these things that I did before, and my confidence is a negative balance. But as you progress and as you receive services and training from someone like myself and Sean and other people, it's our hope that confidence, that negative balance becomes a credit. So you get your confidence back over time. But it starts, a lot of folks, it starts small and then it gets bigger over time. You kind of expand outward and you think, well, if I can cut zucchini without cutting myself, then maybe I can cut eventually chicken, or I can cut, how about this? How about cut a steak? Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I love a good steak every once in a while. I love a good steak. So I think I saw a comment there from Liz. What did Liz say, Rebecca?
1 second. Liz said cut veggies the same size to skewer and cook.
Okay. Skewer and cook. I haven't even thought of that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Any other comments, thoughts, observations, or anything maybe you guys have in your repertoire that I don't have in mine that maybe you guys could share with the class? Liz, you had some really good suggestions. I think we had some TVIs out there as well today. I hope some of these things that I discussed, maybe you could then eventually show to your students. Not a lot of it is incredibly complicated, but sometimes it's the simple things that can really make a difference when we talk about accommodation for blindness or for visual impairment. It's often been the case, in my experience anyway, that simple things like putting the knife underneath the cutting board, or using a cookie sheet to assemble your items, or using the bridge on top of the item to ensure you're cutting in the right spot. But all these things together, I think, can really make you a very independent person eventually, if not now. Any other questions?
Alice had her
comments.
hand raised. It's gone.
Yes, Alice?
Yes, I noticed on your cookie sheet you had a fork. Do you
Oh,
ever use
I
it?
had a fork. Yeah, thank you, Alice. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I was just going to gloss right over that. So why do I have a fork? All right, let me show you what I have a fork for. So I'm going to take my zucchini here, okay? All right. Now I'm going to locate my fork in my cookie sheet. That's a great catch there because I was totally forgotten about that. I was out of sight, out of mind. In my case, it's pretty literal.
Why it is for me all the time.
So why do I have a fork? Okay, so this is an alternative way of maybe cutting, similar to maybe the bridge technique, but instead of using my two fingers on top, my index finger and my thumb, I can take in place of that a fork and put it on top. Rebecca, is that visible?
Yes.
So then, same principle, I have stability with the fork, okay, on top. And then I can bring the knife, check this out, I can bring the knife in between the points of the fork and cut it in half. How about that? Now I got two equal pieces. Same principle applies. And that's helpful because it goes back to that issue of dexterity. You know, a fork on top while you're holding it can really provide stability to what you're cutting. Also, it's helpful because maybe somebody's got some concerns about getting injured, and you want to maybe create some distance between the knife blade and your hands. You can put the fork on top, put your hand on top of the handle of the fork as the points are facing down, and then bring the knife in between, and then cut it in half. There we go. Good catch there, Alice. I was going to completely gloss over that. Forgot about that. And Brenda, if you're still listening, that might also help you too, is using a fork on top, skewering the apple or the item with the fork, and then putting the knife blade in between the points of the fork. And that would make sure that your fingers are completely out of the way. Really even help further minimize the risk of injury, okay? Good catch, Alice. Any other questions, comments? So I hope today you guys have learned some helpful things. If you have any further questions, you can always give us a call at the Lighthouse if you want to discuss it further with me. Before we wrap up here, let's just go over again the schedule this week. So tomorrow morning, we have Alex at 10 o'clock for O&M and fitness. And then on Wednesday, we have our Talking Book folks. Yes.
You have a hand raised. The last four, I think it's Wendy.
Oh, hi, Wendy.
Hi, Kevin.
Hello.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna like the fork technique better, and I just want to thank you because I was still stumped with a bridge. I mean, in my mind, I was just kind of saying, well, what is it?
It's
Do I have the
right. It's almost like like a hand puppet, almost the way it looks in the profile. But it looks to me, in my mind, it kind of resembles a bridge. But that's why I had the fork. So in place of that technique, you could use a fork.
Yeah, and I think the fork would work better because when you keep saying bridge, I'm saying, is the knife up under my hand or what? I'm not just, I could never grasp it.
No, you're fine. So let me just describe that one more time. So I have a piece of zucchini here in front of me, and I'm going to lay that flat. And so as the zucchini is laying flat here in front of me on the camera for those who can see, I am bringing my index finger and my thumb on either side and then I'm bringing it above so that the points of my finger are touching the zucchini. And so it looks almost as like I don't know how else to describe that, but basically my index finger and my thumb are touching on top of the zucchini. My other fingers are curled in. And then I bring my blade in between my index finger and my thumb with the knife facing down. But if you find that fork approach where works well for you, then that's totally fine. No one's going to jump in with their with their referee whistle and cry foul. That's why I had that there. So in case this technique wasn't understandable, because I know generally. Yeah, thank you, Liz. That's what I was looking for. Liz she is on top of it today. She is sharp as a tack. Upside down U. Thank you. Generally, when I teach this technique, it would be in person. It would be hand over hand, and so. Thank you. Gosh, you guys are. I'm gonna take all these descriptions. Yes, a C on its side. Thank you, Allie. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Does that answer your question, Wendy?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I'm gonna stick with the fork because I tend to cut as if I can see. So.
Sure. And that's a great point. Because it's interesting. A lot of people, when they lose their sight, do a lot of things that they did before the same way. So much of it is muscle memory. It's like brushing your teeth. You know how to do it. You have the knowledge to know how to do that, and so it's a matter of really muscle memory. And I have worked with people who have concerns about cutting themselves, and we'll work on it. And I'll ask them, well, how did you cut before? And they'll show me. And it's really, in some ways, it's not much different than and how they did it when they could see. But because they're blind now, they have an understandable fear of injury, because, as I said earlier, sometimes our blindness can talk us out of doing things because of there's that fear factor, right?
Yeah, because I don't do anything unless someone's here. I don't do any sharp objects or anything unless someone's here. Because I'm like, okay, I just don't anymore. So.
Right. Our approach has always been really to equip someone like you in such a way that you're independent, and so that it won't matter if somebody's there or not. Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's always that question of what are you going to do if no one's here and you need to get something done. Right. It's often human nature to not want to wait. We want to get it done, if we can do it on our own. And we believe that you can do that. You just have to have the right techniques and tools at your disposal to do those things.
Well, okay. I sure appreciate it, but I'm just learning. So.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it so much.
Absolutely. You bet. We're happy to help it. You bet. And also, we are very open to suggestion as well. We want to make this really user-friendly for you guys, or I guess topic appropriate for you out there listening. So if you have ideas about or questions that you have, like Alex mentioned earlier about cutting tougher items or things related to that, we certainly are open to that, and we could discuss that too and make that its own discussion.